Hi, welcome to Granny Charlotte's Adventure Stories, where today we're reading Chapter 9 of Little Pilgrim's Progress. But as always, before we get going, we have 3 vocabulary words today. Our first word, because of course this is going to be a person that little Christian encounters on his journey, is humiliation. That means to make someone feel bad, embarrass them, or make fun of them. Unfortunately, I think we all know that word way too well. Humiliation. Faithful. This is another person Pilgrim will run across in his journey. Faithful means someone who can be trusted or believed. Someone who keeps their promises. Faithful. And our last vocabulary word today is actually a name of God. The word is Emmanuel. And Emmanuel means God with us, or Jesus with us. Emmanuel. Thank you very much, and let's get reading. Little Christian spent 3 whole days at the Palace Beautiful. On the second day, discretion allowed him to see the armory. This was a large room in which were stored all kinds of weapons and armor for the use of the king's servants. Here Christian saw long rows of shining helmets, shields, and breastplates of the finest brass, glittering swords, and shoes that Charity told him could never be worn out. And he noticed that these were not all intended for grown-up persons. There were helmets that he felt sure were too small even for him, and tiny swords that seemed only fit for children to play with. "Are they toys?" he asked. "No," said Piety, "they are for the little pilgrims." Then Christian could not help thinking how very much he would like to have a sword and shield of his own and be one of the king's own soldiers. Piety sat down by one of the windows in the armory and told Christian about the wonderful things that some of the king's soldiers had done. The story he liked best was that of a boy named David who, when he was young, had fought with a great giant and been able to kill him and even cut his head off. The giant was one of the king's enemies, said Piety, and he thought he could easily kill little David. He was covered with armor from head to foot, and David wore only a shepherd's dress and carried neither a sword or spear. "What did he fight with?" asked Christian. "He had a sling and a stone, and when he threw the stone at the giant, the king helped him, and he aimed so well that he struck the giant on the forehead and killed him." And here's our picture of David and Goliath. See how big Goliath is compared to David? That didn't matter because the king helped David, and the king will always help you too. This story comforted little Christian, for if the king had helped David, no doubt he would be ready to help any other little pilgrim who trusted in him. On the 3rd day, Christian said to Prudence, "Is it not time for me to go on my journey?" "Not yet," answered Prudence. "It is misty this morning, and you have not seen the view from the roof of the palace." So little Christian spent another happy day. In the morning, when he opened his window, he found that the mist had all passed away, and as soon as breakfast was over, the 3 girls took him up to the roof. It was flat so that people could easily walk upon it or even sit there in the pleasant summer weather. Christian looked towards the south, and far away in the distance he could see a long range of beautiful hills with broad green fields and vineyards and shady woods. He could even see the streams sparkling in the sunlight as they flowed down into the quiet valleys. "Oh," he exclaimed, "what a lovely country that must be." "Yes," said Piety, "that is Emmanuel's land, and the way of the king passes through it. The hills are called the Delectable Mountains, and from them you will be able to see the gates of the celestial city." "Will it take me long to get there?" asked Christian. "I do not know," answered Piety. "You are a little pilgrim, and you cannot travel very fast." Just then they heard the voice of Discretion calling to them. "We must let little Christian start in good time," she said, "in order to reach the valley before the sun is so hot." "I am ready," began Christian, but Charity interrupted him. "No, he is not ready. Is he, Mother? We have something more to do for him, have we not?" "Yes," replied Discretion, and she led the way to the armory. Between the palace and the celestial city, the king's enemies are often very troublesome, and even the little pilgrims need to carry weapons. Christian's cheeks glowed with pleasure when he found that he was ready to have a suit of armor for his very own, and Discretion and her daughters seemed pleased also. "I like to see you made into a soldier," said Charity, and Christian wished that Christiana could have been there too. "You must take care of your armor," said Discretion, as she chose out a helmet of the right size. "It must always be kept bright and shining." Then Piety brought him a shield, which was just large enough to protect him and not too heavy for him to carry. Prudence fastened the sword at his side, and Charity fitted his shoes. Then, when he was completely dressed, Discretion bent down and kissed him as she had done so before, saying, "May the blessing of the king go with you, my child, and may you continue as his faithful soldier and servant all the days of your life." Little Christian felt too happy to speak, so he just put his arms around Discretion as if she had been his own mother, and she well understood that his heart was full of love and gratitude. "You must thank the king," she said. "It is he who gives you all these things." And here is a picture of the armor of God. Let's talk about this for just a minute. We have the helmet of salvation. We have the breastplate of righteousness. We have the girdle of truth. And we have his sheet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Watchful was standing at the door of the lodge when little Christian came out of the palace. When he was opening the gates, he told Christian that another boy pilgrim had passed by. "I asked him his name," said the porter, "and he told me it was Faithful." "Oh," cried little Christian, "I know him very well. His house was quite near to ours. How long has he been gone? Do you think I can overtake him?" "It is about half an hour since I saw him," replied Watchful. "I should think by this time he will be at the bottom of the hill." Christian was so pleased at the thought of having a companion that he determined to walk as quickly as possible in order to overtake Faithful. But first he must say goodbye to his kind friends who had all come down to the gates with him. "It is a beautiful morning," said Discretion. "Suppose we go to the foot of the hill with little Christian." "That would be very nice," said Charity, "and perhaps we may find Faithful there. I wonder why he did not come in to see us." "It is early," said Discretion, "and no doubt he wished to hasten on his way." "I told you that Palace Beautiful was built at the top of the hill of Difficulty. The valley below was called the Valley of Humiliation, and the path that led down into it from the gates of the palace was very steep indeed. Christian was glad when Discretion took his hand and held it tightly in her own, for he could scarcely keep from slipping. "I think it is difficult to get up this hill and dangerous to go down," he said. "Yes," replied Prudence. "People sometimes have had bad falls upon this path." It was not long before they found themselves in the valley, and then Discretion gave Christian a little package of food, which she had brought with her. "We have been very glad to see you," she said, and I shall not forget to give your message to your father when he comes to the palace." Little Christian was quite sorry to say goodbye, and when Discretion and her daughters had left him, he felt very lonely indeed. The valley was quiet and cool, and he walked on quickly, hoping soon to see Faithful in the distance before him. But instead of Faithful, he presently saw a very evil-looking man coming along the path to meet him. As he drew near, Christian remembered his name, for he had seen him before. He was one of the chief armed officers in the army of the wicked prince, and he was called Self. "He is one of the king's enemies," thought Christian, "and he will try to hurt me. What shall I do?" At first, he thought he would turn around and run toward the foot of the hill. Discretion might look back and see him, or perhaps Watchful might be at the palace gates and would send someone to help him. But then he remembered that he had no armor for his back, and that his breastplate and shield would be of no use to him unless he faced his enemy. So he determined to trust in the king and go straight on. Perhaps, as he was such a little boy, Self would pass by without talking. He walked on steadily, and in a few minutes, Self was quite close to him. "I should like to know where you have come from," he said, stopping in front of Christian and looking down at his bright armor. Christian felt very much frightened, but he answered, "From the city of destruction." "And where are you going?" "To the city of the king." "Perhaps you have forgotten," said Self, "that the city of destruction belongs to me. If you were not a little boy who can be taken back again, I should kill you for running away without asking for my permission." "I know the city belongs to you," replied Christian bravely, "but the king loves me better than you do, and I would rather live with him." Then Self smiled. "Don't be foolish," he said. "I can be very kind to people when I like them, and if you will come back with me and promise not to run away again, I will not be angry with you. You shall live in my house and be one of my own servants." "I am one of the king's servants," said Christian. "That does not matter. The king's servants often run away from him. Besides, you were my servant when you were at home, and you ought to be very glad that I am willing to forgive you and take you back again." Poor little Christian felt that tears were coming into his eyes and his lips were beginning to tremble, but he answered, "I love the king, and I would rather be his servant. Please let me go on." But Self had made up his mind that Christian should go home with him. So he said, "Don't be in a hurry. Just think of all the trouble you may meet on the way. Our soldiers are up and down everywhere. And if they see you and try to hurt you, I don't suppose the king will take the trouble to help a child. You know you have served him very badly since you set out. You were so careless that you fell into the slough of despond, and you let worldly deceive you and turn you out of the right path. Then you slept in the arbor and lost your roll, and when you came in sight of the lions, you were very nearly turning back for fear of them. And yet, at the Palace Beautiful, you talked as if you were one of the king's most faithful servants. I don't know how you can expect him to do anything for you." Little Christian knew that all these things were true, and he wondered how Self had heard about them. "I have been very sorry," he said, "and the king will forgive me. He knows I am only a little boy." Then Self could not keep back his anger any longer. He had been speaking gently because he wished Christian to forsake the king of his own accord. But when he saw that his words were of no use, he became fierce with passion. "I hate your king," he cried, "and everybody and everything that belongs to him. You are my servant. and you shall never go to the celestial city, for I will kill you! Here's what I think Self might have looked like. Do you remember the Hulk, how he gets so green and big and mean when he gets angry? That's what I think Self did in front of little Christian. Well, that concludes our reading for today. We'll see what happens next. Don't forget to wash your hands, brush your teeth, and eat an ice chip. Today, I'm having a root beer float. See you tomorrow.